Good morning, students. I hope you're doing well. Forgive me if it looks a little creepy. I am recording this early in the morning with my wife and my children asleep because, like you, I am basically dealing with two very young ones who are not in school, so they're daddy's girls, and it takes up most of my day to take care of them. So in order to take care of you, I'm going to your hours as well. It has not been that long ago when I was a student, and hey, I can do this, okay? I hope you're all doing well. Let us jump right into this lesson for Chapter 12 on addressing competition and driving growth. And this is certainly going to be a subject, once we're through with this, that every company is going to be interested in. This chapter basically concerns how do we go about growing our businesses, not only relative to the overall market, but also our position in the industries that we work in as well. So many of you work as, in essence, the big dogs in your own personal porch. Some of you may be industry followers. Some of you may be niche individuals as well. Each one of those particular individuals has a unique place in the market. And so what we'll talk about is how do we go about growing the shares necessary to achieve success. Well, there are a few basic ways in which we can grow the core of our business, and three generic ways that David Taylor, our marketing guru, cited was three unique strategies. One of them is to make the core of your brand, what your brand stands for, as unique and as distinctive as possible. If I were to say the name Jeep or to say the name Wrangler, when you put those words or those brands in your mind, they're unique and they are distinctive and they mean something to you. If I were to say Hershey's chocolate versus Godiva chocolate, both of those in your own mind would give you a very unique picture. So making the core brand distinctive is one strategy. The next is, and it's one of the very unappreciated ones, except until if you consider around 2008, 2009, is that you drive distribution through not only existing channels, but new channels as well. If I were to look at 2008, 2009, we had the birth of what was known as the omni-channel. This was spurred from basically smartphones that were able to gather information, and that information was used to help people shop. Distribution is one of the most unappreciated of the 4 Ps, and the fact that we can drive them through so many unique ways is one of those ways that creates and grows the core. One of those have done a very good job on it, I can say, over the last 3 or 4 years, and I've talked about that, has been Walmart. Walmart has found new ways to channel goods to consumers, and it has definitely contributed to the overall strength. All I have to do is simply say that if I wanted to shop from Walmart, I could go into the store, I could buy those goods online, I could buy those goods online and pick them up myself and go shopping more, or I could stay in my car and they would put those goods in my car. Those are examples of driving distribution through existing channels and then basically being able to provide the same goods in a unique fashion. The third is, and we're going to talk about this in a few seconds, is that you can offer the core product in new formats and new versions. This is known as diversification. And examples of that would be, of course, is the real hot number now for talking about consumables, especially when we talk about the quote sin goods, is looking for candies and soft drinks in less than 100 calorie consumptions. I find it very interesting that they're making the candy bars bigger and they're using the phrase tear and share, like I'm going to share my M&Ms, right? Okay, but that is an example that you can take the core product, find new ways, new formats, and those are ultimately new ways in being able to grow the core. Okay? So, one of the ways to look at the market is to also look at those corporations and where they are in the market itself. And so, if we're looking at the markets, generally what you find is that the markets break themselves down into what are considered to be four main kinds of groups in any industry, all right? So when I talk about market leaders, what we're talking about is an industry. So if we were to look at the cell phone industry, that would be an example, all right? So generally speaking, all right, and you can really hurt yourselves when you talk in generalities, but generally what you find is that most markets have four groups, okay? You have the market leaders. Generally they fall around having maybe a substantial amount of the market. They're using a number 40% here, and that's roughly right, okay? You have the market challengers. The market challenger generally is somewhere around 30%. You have the market followers who basically, they're not actually trying to set strategy, but to stay in kind of niche. And then you have what are called the market nichers, or that they have a unique, special kind of part in the market. So if we were generally talking, let's just use the cell phone industry, the market leader, depending on what is your favorite brand, could be either considered Samsung or Apple with the iPhone. Either one of those could be considered the market leader or the market challenger. It just depends on, you know, where you put them as an individual group. Certainly a market follower could be considered one of the lesser brands. You know, Nokia is still a brand out there that is used quite a bit. And then a market niche would be something like the Blackberries, where the BlackBerry has a very unique quality about it, and it's its security. And so while Blackberries may never regain the market share that they have one unique special quality that still makes them in demand. Okay? All right. So, what should a market leader do? Okay? Well, generally what a market leader should do is they try to look for either more customers or more usage of their particular brand. And there's multiple ways that they can do that, all right? Now, I'm going to go to this next slide, and this next slide basically talks about market growth strategies, generally for the industry leaders, but you can use this in many, many ways, okay? So, one of the things that a market leader can do is try to grow the overall market. Because if I'm maintained as a market leader, what it means is that as the whole market grows, I grow at the same time. So, if I have my existing product and I'm in an existing market, one of my strategies is known as penetration. And what penetration quite seeks to do is to simply have consumers consume more of that existing product in that existing market. Okay, so of all of these four strategies, test question, of these four strategies, the easiest to implement is penetration. Because if you wanted to penetrate the market, have consumers buy more, one of the easiest ways that you can do it, the easiest of the four P's, is to cut price. And if you cut price, generally consumers will consume more. Except if you are selling Rolex watches and you cut your price to $50, then consumers are going to wonder what's going on. Okay? So, penetration, you try to sell the same product in the same market and you try to sell more. And there's many ways that you can do these. You can do buy one, get one. You can use coupons. Generally, this is the product of sales promotions where they try to get you to buy a product in a given time frame. Okay? The next way that you can do that is that in the same market, what you can do is what's known as the product development strategy. All right? And so what you try to do is create growth in the existing markets by selling new products. And so an example of this, as I've said before, is to take an existing product and change the size, or change the shape, or change the way consumers use it. So baking soda was one of those things that was used for baking. However, there are many other uses for baking soda. All right? You can use them to clean your teeth. You can use them to put out fires. You can use them also when it comes to keeping the smells in your refrigerator from overwhelming you. And one of the things that Arm & Hammer did in the 60s was they started broadcasting the brand to be able to be used in the refrigerator themselves. And what they did was they created a specific box that was built different than the other boxes that would open in a different way so that that particular good could be used for a different purpose. Okay? So, let's say you have gone through and you found as many possible ways that you could to be able to take this product and create some unique uses for it. Well, the next logical step is to take your existing products into new markets, and that in essence is a market development strategy. And so what you've done is you've gotten very good at what you're doing, and so you take your successes and you move it to new markets, and those new markets have new products for them to be able to try. Now, it doesn't always work, all right? There's some markets where your particular products can be successful, but there are some markets that quite simply don't have a use for your good. So, in a way, Walmart was wildly successful in Central and South America. It had limited success in Asia, and it has no success in Europe. And so it kind of gives you an idea that the market sometimes will work successfully and other times that they won't. This is not a test question, but if I were going to say how this generally works, is generally you work on a market, you penetrate the market, then what you do is you take your existing product, you go to new markets, and then when you have exhausted the number of new markets that you can go into, then you start trying to create new products, okay? And that's what the product strategy is. Now, at last what happens is that once you have exhausted the new products and you've exhausted the markets that you can be in, the last is diversification, and I just talked about this, is where you have entirely new products in entirely new markets to achieve growth. And so an example of this is I use all the time is Starbucks. So Starbucks penetrated the United States, it penetrated the world, it accepted cannibalism in which one store takes from the sales of another as a market strategy, but eventually even they fill up the world. Well, what was Starbucks to do? Well, Starbucks in 2007, 2008, you started seeing them in your local grocers. And what they were doing was you started to see their cold products being in the refrigerated section. You started seeing their coffee on the shelves. And I saw this the other day and I thought it was brilliant. I saw in an auto parts store one of those stand-up little coolers with, of all things, with Starbucks products in it. To me, I just think that's genius. It's a risk, because it may not be considered the potential for that particular market of individuals coming from auto parts. But if you also consider it, many people just get simply tired of drinking Cokes, and there's always the possibility that they would prefer that. So my kudos to Starbucks for that. So these are the 4 growth strategies that you can use when you're trying to achieve some way of constantly expanding the market. So let me go back to this slide, and I want to kind of emphasize 3 things, okay? As a leader, you have 3 options. You can expand total market demand, you can protect your market share, and then you can try to increase market share, all right? Those 3 things. So this slide talked about ways that we could do both increase market share and increase your total market demand, all right? Let's talk about protecting your market share, all right? Now, along with all of these offensive kinds of properties that you have to go out and increase your market, you must always be willing to accept the fact that your market is always going to be attacked by someone else, okay? The front runner should always be in the lead in developing new products, but you also have to anticipate those coming up from behind you and in fact even passing you. And so protecting market share means also that you're the industry leader when it comes to innovation. Now, there are 2 ways that you can go about, or that there are proactive marketing. One of them is responsive anticipation, and where this is, as a corporation, you react to some kind of unique change in the market. And then there is creative anticipation, where in essence you devise innovative solutions to be able to, in other words, counteract and get ahead of the market before the market does something in particular. Now, responsive anticipation is a response that happens after the change takes place, all right? Creative anticipation is expecting the change and leading the market, okay? Now, in 2009, before the release of the iPad, Microsoft was working on a similar particular product known as the Microsoft Courier. So what was the Microsoft Courier? It was an iPad that was a foldable book form tablet that would be able to do all of the things that an iPad would, but it would be done actually almost like a book. So it would be like the size of a folded sheet, where it would be like a piece of paper folded in half, and it had all of the unique functions and abilities that an iPad had. This is a commercial that actually came, and this was created in 2009. This is what the Courier would have looked like. So what I'm basically showing you is I'm showing you that this particular product called the Courier was developed that could do everything, as I've said, that the iPad could do. If you notice, in a book form, it also had a pen. And here's the thing. If it would have been released, it would have been released 6 months before the iPad was. Now, why didn't Microsoft do this? Because it was an enormous fight in Microsoft at the time between who was going to be the winner, especially for the fact of is that there was the old guard that was very concerned that this was going to replace the Windows operating system because this did not run Windows. And their insistence was that if they were going to develop a portable brand, then that portable brand should be running a portable version of Windows. Well, the problem with that, unfortunately, is that Windows is no longer 95% of all of the operating systems out there. All right? The leader now is, of course, the tablets, and the tablets have taken over the predominant operating systems out there, either iOS or Amazon, going blank, Android, and now Microsoft only owns 37% of the overall operating systems. Now, come into 2020, and guess what? Microsoft is looking to announce a brand new product. And what is this brand new product? Okay, you get the idea, okay? 10 years later, a decade later, after after Apple has sold millions and millions of iPads, and Samsung has sold those, and the smartphone industry has dominated where it has, Microsoft finally is starting to play catch up. But just look at what they have lost along the way. I mean, they have lost a market dominance that they, in essence, could have said. And this is the difference between creative anticipation and responsive anticipation. And it is the desire to be an industry leader versus being a follower. And so that leads us into the concept of innovation. And what are the 3 ways in which we can innovate? So, the first way that we do innovation is what's known as continuous innovation. Continuous innovation is a modification of an existing product. This is the most common form of innovation. It requires just a slight change in the way that we do things, or many times it wouldn't be any changes at all. And so an example is when everyone comes out with a higher pixelation on their cell phones. So you go from 3 megapixels to 6 megapixels and 19 megapixels. And now all of a sudden you have dual cameras, and you have dual cameras on the front, you have dual cameras in the back, one in the front. These are examples. You understand how to use them because you've already used them, but you are changing them. There's a slight modification. If I were to look at one brand as a market leader, I would look at Samsung as being the leader of continuous innovation. Samsung products are in a constant innovation flow. Every 2 months or so, they come out with a particular item that is brand new. All right. Now, that doesn't usually, when you come to continuous innovation, that kind of blocks the introduction of knockoffs, because knockoffs are new products that are copies of an original product. Okay. Generally, knockoffs are difficult to legally protect in designs of technological innovations, because quite simply there are multiple ways to do things, and that's the whole concept of what reverse engineering is that you change things in a slight way so that it is relatively easy for you to be protected against copyright infringement. All right. Companies like Samsung deliberately, continuously innovate so that knockoff products are unable to simply keep up. Dynamically continuous innovation is a pronounced modification in a particular product. So in other words, that requires a modest amount of learning for consumers to be able to actually use those products. And so if we were taking an example, would be in the record industry, when we went from vinyl, which this is, to CDs, that would be considered a dynamically continuous innovation, because the way that you use CDs were demonstratively different than the ways that you use vinyl. CDs had advantages of being, what's the word I want to use, less likely to have difficulties with them. Vinyl records are easily scratched. Of course, compact disc had their same difficulties as well, but this is an example of it was a certain amount of modest amount of learning to be able to use. All right. Now, usually you see dynamically continuous innovations, especially they're also called disruptive technologies, because usually what happens is that you have the convergence of basically 2 or 3 different technologies coming together to create an entirely new system. So the smartphone industry as a whole really started showing itself, especially in the 2008-2009, when you started to see cell phones that you could browse on the internet, that you started to see cell phones with cameras. You started to see cell phones that had memory on them. And this is this convergence technology that basically started creating all of these new and unique products. And this is what's considered to be a dynamically continuous innovation. A discontinuous innovation is one in which there is a major change in the way that consumers live. In other words, the consumer's life is no longer the same. This particular product is so unique and so special that we change the way we do our lives. In my lifetime, I can think of multiple ones. Microwaves, when they came out, they were very unique. Another thing about discontinuous innovations is it requires a substantial learning curve to be able to use them properly. When microwaves came out, there was all sorts of ways. In essence, it was thought of as it completely replacing your oven. And of course, this is not true. I mean, anyone who has ever tried to, cook meat in it, you cook meat too long in a microwave oven, you got yourself a good saddlebag. Okay. That's an example, all right? You need a certain amount of education to use them properly. So microwaves, computers, I could say in a substantial way you might want to consider iPads, because iPads have completely changed, tablets in general, the way that we do things. Cell phones, certainly they have. Internet, no doubt about it. And these are, in essence, what discontinuous innovations are. They profoundly change the way that we do business, okay? Now, I'm going to stop here because we've recorded 30 minutes, and I am going to pick up on what the marketers or the market leaders need to do in terms of protecting market share, and these are what are called defensive marketing strategies. Okay? So, look for part 2 of this to be put up very soon.